Seems to be recording. Perfect. So hey guys, how are you doing? Today we're going to be talking about a very trendy subject, a little bit of aim training. Maybe it's going to be something that you need, maybe it's something that you don't need, but I will make sure to cover it in detail so you do know what's happening. Okay. Big reminder, we're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, so please, any subscriptions would be appreciated. Anything that I cover in this video will be provided in the description. So if you want to revisit this VOD and you want to look over the stuff that I'm going to be talking about, there's going to be a little bit of a catalog there on the stuff that you can cover. Okay, so today's class is going to cover an aim training playlist that I saw and I've been testing myself for a little bit now. It's a pretty difficult playlist, but I do think the skills that you practice with it are very important. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what that playlist is and what it's about. So the playlist comes from a user named Fantasy. And basically the thread talked about a particular skill that not a lot of people talk about. Most of the time when people are playing a game like Valorant, they're thinking mostly about flicking. They're thinking mostly about what is it like to keep that crosshair placement going. And I've talked about other playlists in the past, like Improve Demon 1 by VT Minigod, just a revamped playlist from what Demon 1 uses to kind of keep that same skill going, keeping that same horizontal smoothness and keeping the same flicking patterns that you would use in Valorant. Now, why would we use this playlist? So, what does this playlist target specifically? The playlist targets a certain skill called hit confirmation. Now, if you're not really familiar with that term, I really don't blame you. There's a lot of nuance in the terminology that people use in the community. So what it basically means is that when you are finishing a flick, as you can see in the little VOD right here, when you finish a flick onto a target, there's a certain moment where you have to confirm the target. And that is basically you flick, you have a small micro flick to hit the target, and then once you're done with that, you then move on to the next target. Most of the time, people just tend to just be raw about it and just hit the target, move on to the next, and move on to the next. But when you're using hit confirmation, or at least when you're practicing this skill, you're focusing on the smoothness of moving on to the next target, maintaining really smooth target acquisition while at the same time keeping the speed, which leads to, like, as he talks later, a very bouncy like movement. Okay, so when we're looking at a game like Valorant, we can see that most of the time players that hit a wall around Diamond and Ascendant are having a really hard time basically balancing both the teams that they're playing with and at the same time balancing how they're getting those kills. And multi-kills are a huge portion and part of it. So when we're looking into this target acquisition, target confirmation, we can see how we can get onto multiple targets and in maybe like a fight or maybe in a particular team fight that we're in. So when we're looking at this, it's a very niche skill, but Fantasy talks about the strength of the skill. Okay. When we're looking at different targets, when we're trying to get between target 1 and 2, we can see that the timing between the two targets is very slow when you just practice the raw flick itself. So when you're mostly focusing on your aim playlist and you're trying to just focus on your flicks, you might be good at dealing with that first target. But when you have to move on to the second, you might have a really hard time really dealing with the transition between the first and the second target. And I really don't blame you. There's some things with the game, the randomness, the first bullet accuracy, the spray that you have to deal with, right? There's some stuff in there. But when you're dealing with a playlist like this, it focuses particularly on the timing between finishing the first target and going on to the next. Okay, so when you are looking to this playlist, it is very crucial for you to practice those skills. And the way that it teaches you that is by giving you it gives you scenarios that focus on very small windows to be able to flick onto the target. Okay, we're going to see in a couple examples in just a second. Other things that you will target is basically you being able to target flick onto a target, and then from there you can then flick onto the next with very little penalty, allowing you to practice the smoothness between one flick and the next. And last but not least, it also forces you to try to have quick reactions. Okay, so here's a couple examples. Okay, so why try it? There's a lot of Valorant focused playlists, and I've offered some in the past. The one that I've offered the most is Improve Demon 1 by VT Minigod. It focuses primarily on the smoothness of that horizontal line because you're mostly keeping your crosshair in a horizontal line when you are clearing corners, when you're keeping that crosshair placement level, right? It's a really good playlist, and it teaches that raw mechanical aspect that you will need in the game. However, people hit a wall, and when people hit a wall, this is mainly why. They're mainly hitting a wall because they don't feel like they're able to transition between one target and the next. They feel like as though they don't have enough time to deal with the second target. Maybe Even on that first target, maybe they're killing a Reyna flash like a Lear, and they can't switch onto that second target. A playlist like this would help you deal with those particular differences between dealing with one target and moving on to the next. And here we can see, just from the examples themselves, you can see that in the scenarios shown, very little time between moving onto the target, because they're moving so quickly, they might change speeds in between, right? That when you're trying to go about it and trying to hit the target, you might feel a little overwhelmed to maybe hit it, and you're going to start clicking like crazy. As you're developing that skill, it'll become a lot smoother and it'll become a lot quicker when you do manage to hit that target. Okay, so with that out of the way, right, we are going to be looking a little bit past that. We're going to be looking at more into this playlist. The playlist the Fantasy provides targets this skill. So when you are practicing this, it doesn't really quite matter how you go about it, but you're going to notice that the more you play this type of scenario, when you're playing more of these scenarios that it provides, you're going to be seeing that this playlist is enforcing you to be quick about the way that you are finishing the decision of clicking the first and moving on to the next. Okay, if you're going to be improving in Valorant and any game in general, you cannot just target the robust skills that I just showed with the previous playlist with Improved Demon 1. You sometimes need to hit that wall and break through it by targeting smaller, more niche skills. And this is what this is going after. So what about results? So I've talked about Fantasy. I've talked about how they provide, some results of their own. When you look at the thread, they'll talk a little bit more about it. But other content creators have discussed this one. So for example, Zapper is another one that I've seen. It's actually who I got the idea from. So he talks a little bit more about what this playlist kind of provides. So first of all, he talks about how he covers the thread and then talks about how he tried it on his own, and then provides video evidence of how he feels after trying the playlist. Okay, this is just one example out of many. I'm going to then just show a couple of results from a video in the next slide, but let's talk about the pros and cons of this particular playlist. So the pros of it is that it improves the fluidity between targets, and that includes the reaction time when you're picking from one target and moving on to the next. When you're dealing with this, it'll just give you better performance when dealing with multiple targets, and because you're going to have such a small window to clear that first target and move on to the next. The cons, however, it's that it's a niche skill. If you still haven't built that foundation of good flicks, or you still haven't tried and finished maintaining that smoothness when you're keeping that horizontal and keeping yourself within that headshot placement, then you're probably not going to see that much difference in this one. It's still a good skill to practice, and I will not tell you not to try it on your own, but it's something that you still need to make sure that you already have good knowledge of before you try this playlist. Second part about it is it's very hard. If you are not too familiar with playlists, this one might seem very exhausting. So what I would recommend is you're going to see that in the playlist itself, there's multiple scenarios that you have to do. So for example, the first one you might do twice, just do it once. Get a feel for it, figure out what's going on, move on to the next, and try not to worry too much about scores, because that will tire you very quickly. It is a very exhausting playlist. Last but not least, it is Kovaak's exclusive. If you are someone that wants to try it, I am going to put the same code in the description of the video. But at the same time, I'm also going to be putting in the thread over here on the Val training channel. But at the same time, right, it is still Kovaak's exclusive. If you do not have Kovaak's, there's still other things that you can try. And I'm going to be looking for AimLab's alternatives. For now, this is a Kovaak's exclusive playlist. If you do have it, give it a try. If you do not have it, then I apologize. I still believe that using things like the benchmarks for Valorant and still using VT Minigods playlist, you're still going to be fine. Okay. With that out of the way, let's look at some of the examples that they show here. You're going to notice that they're not entirely Valorant related, and that is for a reason. It is a named skill, not a Valorant skill. It is something that you can use, and you can see from the target that basically they're moving from one and then being able to target select the next. Now, don't mind too much about how they're playing. It is still a deathmatch, right? But being able to move from one target to the next is still a very important and very crucial skill for you to master, right? You're going to see that it moves on to other things like Apex, I believe Overwatch as well as included. But yeah, that is basically the extent of the skill and the playlist that we just talked about today. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Let's close this off. Let's talk a little bit more about it and see where this goes.